Hey budget gardeners, Vita Loca here. Join me today as I answer some of your questions about my backyard plant nursery. So let's go. I made a post on YouTube where I asked you to ask me any questions that you have regarding my backyard plant nursery. I want to thank all of you that asked questions. There were a lot of great questions and I'm ready to answer them today. And after you watch this video, if there are any other questions that you have about my nursery, feel free to ask them down in the comment section below and I'll definitely get to answering them. Down below, I'll also include a link to my plant nursery playlist. It has a lot of videos, lots more Q&A type videos. It has nursery tours where I show you the plants that I have in my nursery. And then just some tips and tricks that I wanted to share with you regarding what it takes to run a nursery. I'm entering my third year of having a plant nursery, and what I've learned is each year is a learning experience, but it's been a fun learning experience for me. So we're going to first start with administrative type questions. Do you need a permit to have a plant nursery? It depends on your location. Some locations do require you to have a permit or a license that needs to be renewed on a yearly basis. And along with that license, you may need to pay some sort of nominal fee also in order to run a nursery. So check with your local area to see if you actually need something like that. The way you want to do that is probably just do an internet search and do a search on plant nursery and then wherever you're located. So for me, I would do plant nursery, New Hampshire. Or I could do a search on, do I need a license to sell plants in New Hampshire? And just so you know, where I live here in New Hampshire, I do need a license. And I did need to answer a bunch of questions regarding what kind of plants am I selling and where is my nursery located? How big is my nursery? I did have to pay a nominal fee. I answered questions like, am I shipping out plants? And then also on the state website, it tells me the type of plants that I'm not allowed to sell. It's typically plants that are invasive in my area. And when I submitted my application at the end of last year, along with the check just to cover the cost of running my nursery, in return, the state provided me with an updated nursery license for this coming year. The next question is, do I get help when running my plant nursery? I consider my plant nursery to be fairly small, but nevertheless, it is a lot of work. I run the nursery, I would say 99% by myself. My husband does help me, but very, very small amount. I would say the number one way that he helps me is helping me sometimes get bucketfuls of dirt. At my local transfer station, they have a big pile of dirt, and it's basically compost, but it's full of other material that needs to be sifted out. And a lot of times I'll go and I'll get those bucketfuls of compost myself. There are times though that if he's free on the weekends, he'll help me and he'll help get the dirt, load it in the car, unload it outside of the car. And then the other main way that my husband helps me is especially in the fall time when I'm in crunch mode and I'm trying to move plants around, I'm trying to heal in the plants for the winter months. During that time, a lot of times he'll help me out as well. But otherwise, a lot of it comes down to me. And I don't mind it because it's something I really enjoy. The next category of questions, I would group them under location. The first question is, where do you have your plant nursery located? So my plant nursery is located on my property where I live. It's up my driveway, which is quite a long driveway, on the right-hand side of the driveway. So as you come up my driveway, even though the nursery is located on the right-hand side, people park on the left-hand side of my driveway. There's enough room for people to park their cars, get out of their car, and walk down to my nursery. How much sunlight do your plants get and from which direction? So my nursery is basically tucked into the woods, but there's an opening there. We have cut down a few trees in order to make the nursery. So the nursery does get some sun, it also gets some shade. So I wouldn't call it full sun and I wouldn't call it full shade, but there is enough sun there for the plants to thrive. And then there's also enough shade there so my shade-loving plants can also be happy. And I would say when it comes to sunlight, it's basically on the south or southwest side of my property. The next question is, how much space do I use for my nursery? Like I mentioned earlier, the nursery is not huge, but it's definitely big enough for me and what I'm doing. It's about 20 feet by 25 feet in dimensions. Do my neighbors mind the extra traffic that the nursery brings in? I would say they shouldn't mind because honestly, the nursery is tucked far away from my neighbors. It's again up my driveway, which is a long driveway, and the people that are coming to buy the plants are parking on my property. They're not parking on the road. And I generally only have one, maybe at a maximum, 2 cars here at any given time. And the reason for that is because I have my plant sales by appointment only. Also, I don't have any sort of signage that's on the road or at the end of my driveway that is marketing my plant nursery. And therefore, I'm not getting any additional traffic coming to my house because of the nursery. The next group of questions, I would put those under the bucket called marketing. How do I advertise? The first year I had my plant nursery, I advertised on both Facebook Marketplace as well as Craigslist. And what I found was almost all of my traffic that I had coming in terms of emails, was through Facebook Marketplace. I got very few emails coming in through Craigslist. So after that first year, I switched fully to Facebook Marketplace for advertising my nursery. Do I post pictures of what I'm selling on Marketplace? I do. I try to be very honest, and I try to post pictures of what the actual plants look like. They might be small plants. They might not be very big plants. They might be plants that will not bloom that season that I'm selling the plants. So I'm very honest and very transparent with my advertisements. And I don't want to put pictures of plants of what the future plants might look like. And if I do that, I'm very clear that the first picture is what the plant looks like right now. It might not bloom this current year. The second picture is what the plant is going to look like in future years. I think it's very important to be clear about that because you don't want to set up false expectations when you're selling your plant. The next question is, do I post a full list of the plants that I have for sale? So yes, in my Facebook Marketplace advertisement, I not only post the pictures of the plants, I also post the names of the plants, but I don't post any other additional information like does the plant require full sun or shade or what the height of the plant gets or any of that type of business because I don't want my ad to be very long. It already is very long, so I don't need it to be any longer than it is. My hope is that anyone that is looking at my advertisement is researching the plants. But I will be honest, not everyone does research the plants. They look at the pictures, they might think it's pretty, they might not know anything about the plant, and then they show up and they have a list of plants they want to buy, but then I find out that they have full shade and the plants that they were intending to buy require full sun. So that's something that I'm thinking about and considering for this coming season is how can I make it so that their shopping experience is optimal and so that when they show up here, they know exactly what kind of plants they want given the conditions that they have in their yard. And along the same lines, I really like to just keep it to one advertisement. I don't want to have a whole bunch of ads for each individual plant. I think that's a lot of work, a lot of maintenance. And what I found is people like to bookmark the page, the advertisement. So I really just want to use it as one central location that people can go to. They can see when I've updated my ad. They can see when I've removed plants, added plants. So I really like to keep it in one central location. The next question is, do I boost my Facebook ad? I don't. That's, I believe, additional money that I would have to spend. And I've found that I get enough traffic to keep me really busy, that I don't need to boost my ads. I would probably consider boosting my ads if my plant nursery was a full-time business, if I had a much larger nursery and I was selling a lot more plants. But that's not the case for me, so I don't find a need for me to boost my ads. Next question is, do I post on other local Facebook groups or pages? So far, I haven't. I've only just had the advertisement page, the one page that I'm putting my ad on. But I am planning this year for the first time to start adding a link to that advertisement in other local groups and pages. I have a friend that has a backyard plant nursery and she does that and she highly recommended that I do the same. So that's one of my goals for this winter is to join some local gardening groups that are just in New Hampshire, maybe even a few in Massachusetts, which is the next state over, and start just putting myself out there and then just adding a link to my advertisement so that people are aware that I am selling plants. Is Facebook Marketplace enough to drive people to my business? I would say yes. Facebook Marketplace is definitely enough of marketing to drive people to my business. Now, I say the word business very loosely because This is not a full-time job for me. Selling plants is meant to be a side hustle. And so I am definitely extremely busy spring and into the summer months with selling plants. I don't think I would want to actually drive additional people to my plant nursery business. Now that might be different though for you and what you're hoping to accomplish if you do have a plant nursery or you're thinking of having a plant nursery. But for me, Facebook Marketplace has definitely been enough to bring in enough people to come to my nursery. The next question is, when do I typically open for business in the spring? So my average last frost date is around the middle of May. I'm planning to open for business sometime in the middle of April, and what I'll be selling is mostly cool season plants. I probably won't be selling a ton of perennials at that time, but although I'm not sure, it really depends on whether or not the ground has thawed out enough. That's pretty much when I want to open for business, because a lot of my plants that are in my plant nursery are healed into the ground. That means the pots are below soil level. The plants themselves are above soil level, but the pots are pretty much below soil level. So I really can't be selling any plants here in New Hampshire until the ground has thawed out fully. So it's going to be sometime middle of April into early parts of May. The next question is, do I have one big sale day at the beginning of the year? I really don't. Because I'm selling plants spring, summer into the fall, I just open for business and I'm open that whatever that first day is in April all the way until pretty much the ground freezes. So if I had to guess, I would say my nursery is open starting sometime in the middle of April and it closes sometime around November. And I don't have set hours where my nursery is open. In other words, people can't just stop by because this is where I live. This is on the property of where my house is. And it's by appointment only. So when people reach out to me, then we figure out a day and a time that they can stop by. And then based on that, I really try to limit it. So I only have one person stopping by at a time. That way I can give them my full attention that they need when they have questions about plants. The next question is, do I sell vegetable starts? Last year was my first time selling any sort of vegetable starts. I usually had only sold perennials, so I wanted to experiment and see how I would do with selling vegetable starts. Actually, I did really well. There was a lot of interest in it, and I only sold whatever vegetables I was starting indoors and that I had a lot of. This year, I plan to up my game, and I will be offering a lot more different vegetables, and I'm looking forward to that. And one thing I'm planning to experiment with is I'm going to be winter sowing a ton of vegetables, and I'm going to start with those cool season vegetables. So I have a lot of seeds actually, and so I might as well plant them in milk jugs and get them out in the winter time. And as those plants start germinating, I'll then be potting them up and offering them for sale. I'm looking really forward to that. The next category is called safety. And the question is, am I ever worried about people coming on my property? In other words, do I feel safe? Has there ever been a situation where I didn't feel very safe or where I felt uncomfortable? So yes, safety is very, very important because I am selling the plants from my home. I make my appointments based on my husband also being home. He can always look out the window, he can come outside, so I am very safe when it comes to selling those plants. And that's another reason why when I put my advertisements out there, it's on Facebook Marketplace. I can look up people's profiles and I can get a general feel of who they are. There's been actually a good amount of times when I've looked someone up and they and I have mutual friends. So then I even feel a little more comfortable that, okay, I know that this person knows some of the same people that I know. So there never has been a situation where I didn't feel safe. I think just between my husband being home, looking out the window or coming outside, coupled with the fact that I can look people up on Marketplace makes me feel pretty good about it. And that's another reason why I didn't like Craigslist, because with Craigslist, you can't look people up. The next question is, do I have some sort of home insurance or umbrella policy just in case someone falls on my property or gets hurt in some way? And yes, I do have a homeowner's farm insurance policy that does cover situations like that. And that's important to have because especially where I live, where people are walking out towards the plant nursery, it's on a hill. It's not flat or level. And so there is a chance someone could fall down. It's also out into an area where there are some trees. So on a very windy day, it is possible that a limb could fall. And for those reasons, that's why I went ahead and added farm insurance policy on my homeowner's insurance. And those are things you need to think about too, because you're going to have people with lots of different ages stopping by and different mobility issues as well. Lots of things to consider. The next bunch of questions fall under the category called pricing. How do I set my pricing for my plants? I start with visiting local garden centers, big box stores as well as smaller garden centers, because as you know, the price of everything just keeps going up. And so based on that, I want to make sure that my pricing is competitive. I also check Facebook Marketplace, and I'll do that every single year. And I try to get a feel for what are other people selling their plants for that also have a similar situation as me, where they're selling their plants from their home. And I also take into account the size of the plants that I'm selling. The plants that I'm selling are on the smaller side, at least for right now. They're typically in 3 or 4 inch pots, so they're not in big gallon size pots. That's very important. You need to take that into consideration. Are you selling larger size plants or smaller size plants? And then you want to price accordingly. New Hampshire does not have sales tax, so I don't need to consider that when I'm pricing my plants. I also request that people pay in cash. I don't typically get any other forms of payment. Very infrequently, I've received checks, and I typically will only accept a check if it's someone that's bought from me before. And the same applies with Venmo payments. I don't usually accept Venmo payments. The primary way that people pay me is through cash. The next question is my nursery profitable? And there are a lot of things that I'm going to share with you that can explain why my nursery is profitable. First of all, my nursery is meant to be a hobby or a side hustle. So I just needed to cover any small amounts of costs that I may have. And my cost is very low. The first year I had my nursery, I did buy some pots. But I've learned over time I don't need to buy pots. I can get pots for free. I can look on Facebook Marketplace. A lot of times people are just wanting to get rid of pots. I can go to a transfer station, and a lot of times you'll find piles of pots for free there. Also, there are some plant nurseries close to me where they have a recycling bin. And inside the recycling bin, there are tons of pots, especially in the spring and summer months. So I'm at a point now where I don't need to pay for any of the pots for my plant nursery. For soil, the same applies. I'm able to get my soil for free, at least for right now. I've been very lucky, from a local transfer station. And I mentioned it earlier that the soil may have other debris in it that I need to sift out. But free is free. My plants thrive. There are no issues with that soil. And if I need to amend the soil, because I do feel that the soil can be a little on the heavier side, I can always add a little bit of perlite. So that there is cost involved with the perlite, but I also use that perlite for my indoor seed starting as well as my winter sowing. So it's used in lots of different ways. So I don't really include that cost of the perlite with my plant nursery. And then, of course, we have the plants. I collect a lot of seeds, and so the seeds are free. I start a lot of those seeds using the winter sowing process because a lot of the seeds are perennials. So I'm not using any additional money when it comes to that. And there may be some plants that I'm starting indoors, and so there's a cost involved with running the grow lights indoors, but I'm also starting a lot of other plants for myself, not just for my plant nursery. I'd say a majority of the plants that I start indoors are actually just for myself and not for selling. So I don't have a number of how much money do I spend each year on my plant nursery, but I can assure you it's actually very, very low. So I'm very happy with the amount of money I make in my plant nursery. I feel very comfortable in that it covers any sort of associated costs that I have. But I know that other people that have plant nurseries, they buy in plugs, which are small little plant starts. Now, if you were to do that, that's important. You need to take that into account. I am able to start a lot of plants from seed using the winter sowing process, and I'm also able to divide a lot of plants on my property. I love gardening. That's the number one thing, is that I garden for myself. But over time, as I'm dividing plants, I don't always need all those plants. So I'm happy to then divide those plants, pot them up, and sell them and share them with other people that way. And yes, there is some sort of time involved with me running my nursery, but I do it again as a fun thing to do on the side. The next bunch of questions would fall under the category called plant. How do I get my plants big enough so that they are attractive to buyers? That is a great question. So I am going into my 3rd year of selling plants. My first year, my plants were pretty small. Last year, being my second year, the plants were much bigger, yet I didn't adjust my price really. So last year I was selling bigger plants and I really should have increased my prices, but I was still thinking about that first year when my plants were small. Now that I'm going into my third year, the plants are absolutely going to be bigger and more robust. But with that said, I continue to winter sow. And when you winter sow perennials, the plants that first year are on the smaller side. So this year, I'm going to take that into account. I have plants that are big because of dividing them from my landscape. I also have plants that I would consider on the bigger side because they are now 2-year plants or even 3-year plants. So my recommendation is if you're selling plants that are on the smaller side because they are winter sown or started from seed indoors, then you want to price them accordingly, because those plants might not bloom that first year. But if you're going to sell plants that are more mature and that are going to bloom during this growing season, then make sure you're pricing your plants accordingly. I will tell you, a lot of my plants that are in the 3 to 4 inch size pots, generally I sell them for somewhere between $3 to $5 a pot. And what I'm thinking for this year is the plants that most likely won't bloom this year will continue to be about $3. And the plants that are a little bit bigger and more robust that are going to bloom this year would be closer to $5 a pot. And if the pots are even bigger, if they're about 5-inch size pots or gallon size pots, well, those might be $6 or $7, even $8 a pot. You really have to look at your demographics and how much plants are selling in your area. For me, my price point has been, I would say, on the lower side. So this year the price will be going up because I know that I can get more money for my plants. I sell good quality plants. I have a nice variety. And based on what I see other people selling their plants for, I need to up my prices. The next question regarding plants is, when I heal my plants in, do the roots get into the soil? The answer is yes, they do. I have to tell you, if my plant nursery was on an area where it's level, then I most likely would put down some sort of barrier, some sort of very heavy-duty fabric, so that the plants would not do that. However, because of a couple of things, because of the fact that my nursery is on a slight hill, coupled with the fact that the plants are in smaller pots, they're in 3 or 4 inch pots, and then also put in there that I live in a very, very cold area. My temperature can dip down as low as -15 degrees Fahrenheit on average during the winter months. I need to protect all my plants. So that's why I heal them in, because if in those small little pots that they're in, they would not survive. They probably wouldn't even survive very well if they were in bigger pots because of the area that I live in. So it's very important to heal those plants into the ground so that the plants kind of feel like they've been planted. It's not optimal. I do wish that I had a different situation, but it is what it is. So the next question is, so how do I handle that? Well, optimally, what I would be doing and what I hope to do this spring is I will be potting up plants early in the springtime. And I'll really be taking them section by section, where I'm taking the plants out of the ground and I'm potting them up. But with that effort, with that time, with the bigger size pots, the price will go up for those plants. Some people don't mind paying less price, getting a plant that is basically the roots are in the ground and they're in a small pot. They're getting a very good deal on their plants. So some people know that they're going to take those plants, they're going to pull the plants out of the ground, they're going to bring it home, and they're going to pot up the plant, or they're going to get that plant in the ground. In the springtime, it's usually not an issue. It's more when we get into the heat of the summer. My goal for this year is to not have the plants where their roots are in the ground. By summertime, I want all my plants potted up, and it's a great time for me to be dividing my plants, and then I can be selling them in bigger pots for a little bit more money. And the person that asked that question, they live in an area where their temperatures get really, really hot, almost 115 degrees Fahrenheit. So yes, you don't want to be disturbing the roots of your plants during those hot summer months. And that's something that I hope to avoid this year. And along those same lines, I will share with you, last fall, I did start the effort of taking plants out of individual pots, dividing them up, potting them up into bigger pots, and then getting them healed into the ground. So I don't foresee those type of plants having their roots in the ground come springtime. it's more, again, during the summertime as the plants have been in their pots and they've gotten bigger, that you might see that type of situation. The next question is, how do I determine what plants will sell best? I can really just tell you that it comes down to experience over time. And it depends on where you live. So for me, I'm looking at my first year of my plant nursery and what I learned from that year into the second year and now heading into the third year. I find that there's really no popular plant that sells for me. And I'm really being honest with that, because there are some people that in their yard, they have full sun. They don't care to look at my full shade plants. I have people that buy plants from me, they have all full shade. They don't care to look at the plants that thrive in full sun. So you want to offer a good variety of plants given all those conditions. And that's the same is true for vegetables. You might have vegetables that are very popular in your area, like certain heirloom tomatoes. You just want to make sure you're providing a good variety of plants given lots of different conditions that people are growing in. I have a good variety of plants in my nursery at this point, but it's taken me a few years to get there, and I continue to expand on that. But I have to be realistic. My nursery is not huge, so I can't have hundreds and hundreds of different types of plants. I really can only offer what I can offer in the size of the nursery that I have. The next question is, do last year's sales determine what I'm going to sell this year in terms of variety or in terms of how much of certain plants? I don't keep track of how many plants I sold of certain varieties. So for example, I sold hosta. I didn't keep track of which varieties of hosta I sold, how many pots I sold of that, or my bell peppers. I didn't keep track of that either. So again, the purpose of my nursery is to make some money that basically pays for a family vacation each year and pays for my hobby. But for you, it might be different. You may need to keep better records of your plants and how much money you're putting into this nursery of yours and keeping track of what plants are selling and what plants are not selling. But for me, I haven't had to do that, and this system has worked for me. But absolutely, if there was a plant that I found that I was offering and I wasn't able to sell it, it was just sitting there, then I wouldn't bother selling it. But that hasn't been the case. I have found that any plant that I've had in my nursery has been able to move along and has been able to sell. I haven't had any issue. But I would say that I'm not at a point where I'm selling every single plant in my nursery and now I have nothing out there. And the reason is as areas of my nursery start to deplete because I'm selling out of a plant, then I just look around my yard, like let's say Stelladoro daylilies. Those are very popular. And all of a sudden, if I sell out of those, I just go to my yard, I dig up a clump, I divide it, I pot it up, and I put it back in my nursery. So you want to keep that in mind. You want to be able to replenish your stock somehow if you can with the nursery that you have. So now I just want to add my closing thoughts on having a plant nursery. I say be realistic with what your goals are for your nursery. And also, I would say start small if you can. I wouldn't recommend that you start big and spend a lot of money to start up a nursery. And that just comes from who I am and my own personal beliefs. I've never been one to jump head into anything I do. And that could be gardening as a hobby. That could be starting seeds indoors. You could even be winter sowing plants, but I'm especially that way when it comes to running any sort of business. I think it's just important to be realistic with what your goals are with your nursery. And if possible, don't try to do too much at once. For that first year, try to just sell a small amount of plants and see how you do. If it's your first year wanting to try to have a plant nursery, I would suggest do it on a very small budget and try to be realistic with what you're doing. Maybe only have it open for a few days. Maybe it's during the springtime, or if you want to have it all summer long, try to do it on a schedule that works for you. I just wouldn't want to give the advice that for you to run out and buy a whole bunch of stuff to start up a plant nursery. It's really up to you if you want to do that, but that's not how I would run a business. I would prefer to do it on a very small scale and to do it in a way that you're not spending a lot of money. And then if you want to, you can always scale up your business in years to come. And that's maybe even something that I might consider. But for right now, my small little nursery has been working for me. I really hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it answered a lot of your questions. Again, if you have any other questions, drop them down in the comment section below. I'll be making a lot more videos in the future having to do with my nursery. And until the next video, make it a great day with gardening.